I'm Abby Pritchard with Fantastic Forum, and I'm here with Hugo and Nebula and World Fantasy Lifetime Achievement and Bram Stoker and basically every other possible award-winning author, George R.R. Martin. We're here at Capclave, and he just did a really amazing reading with 2 new chapters, or at least partially new chapters, from the upcoming Winds of Winter. And we have a couple questions. I know you're really involved with the SFWA program. Is there a reason that's so personal and so great?
Well, it's the Science Fiction Writers of America is an organization of professional science fiction and fantasy writers that helps each other. It's sort of the union of the field, and it also helps writers in trouble with medical expenses and legal expenses. Has a legal defense fund and a medical emergency fund, so we like to raise money for that. It's writers helping other writers. I've been very, very fortunate in my career. My books have done very well, and I've got a television show and all that. But there's some brilliant writers who are not that fortunate, and they have medical troubles as they get older, and they really need help from the other writers. And SFWA is great for that. So that's why I've always been a big supporter of SFWA.
Awesome. Yeah. You hit your stride pretty early on. You've I believe you won a Hugo back in the 70s.
I did, yes. I was 1975 for Song for a Lyre, best novella.
All right. Well, you've done novellas and short stories, and you've done a lot of screenplay writing, and of course, you've done a few novels that may have done okay.
They haven't done too badly.
Is there a reason that you switch up styles and genres? Do you have a favorite genre to write? And is there something that's particularly easy or difficult in one genre, but not others?
No, as a kid growing up, I read science fiction, fantasy, horror a lot. My father would lump it all together, call it weird stuff. And I sort of lump it all together, too. I don't think of these as distinct and separate genres. I think of them as variations of the same thing. And it's all imaginative fiction, which has always appealed to me more than mimetic fiction of contemporary life. So I'm drawn to that. I'm drawn to these areas of the imagination, but I move from one to another freely. I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. Of course, I've been working on A Song of Ice and Fire, the series that gave birth to Game of Thrones, for a long, long time, but it's one big story. As long as it is, as many volumes as it is, it still has a beginning, a middle, and hopefully eventually an end. And when it's done, I'll move on to something completely different after that, I hope.
Are there things you can get away with in some mediums that you can't get away with in others? For example, is there something you like to do when you're screenwriting that you can't necessarily do when you're writing a novel or a short story?
Well, every form has its own strengths and weaknesses. It has its own set of tools, and you have to be aware of that. When you're writing for television, you have the collaboration of so many talented people. You have people who design your backgrounds for you. You have actors who bring life to your words, and special effects technicians who will do a wonderful job of creating your dragons or your direwolves or your fantastic backgrounds. You also have the addition of things like a score. You'd be amazed at how much background music can add to a scene, be it a tense scene or a battle scene or whatever. Just that music in the background, which sometimes you hardly even notice, really brings out the emotions. And you have all that to draw upon. On the other hand, you also have limitations, too. You have limitations of running time and budget. With books, you can do things. You have devices at your command that the visual arts don't have. You can do things like a strong point of view, which is difficult to do in film. You can have unreliable narrators. Since film is an objective medium, it's hard to have an unreliable narrator because the viewer is seeing the things firsthand. Prose can obscure as well as elucidate, and you have tools that you don't have in film. But on the other hand, you also have to do everything yourself. You are the special effects technicians. You are the background painters and the scenery people. You are the people who have to check for continuity. You don't have a whole team behind you. It's just you and the blank page. So I like both forms. That's why I've worked on both forms. Prose has always been my first love, though. It's where I started out. I was a voracious reader as a child. I'm a voracious reader still. And I love television, I love film, but I love books most of all.
You're notorious, or infamous, for sort of rejecting the way popular fantasy is written a lot of the time. You go for what you feel would realistically happen, as opposed to, this person must succeed because they're the good guy, and that is what happens in fantasy literature. But one of the things I really like that does seem sort of very pointed and intentional is the parallel journeys between Sansa and Arya. And I was wondering if you had any favorite aspect of that, how much it's planned out and how much it's just sort of happened, that these characters have sort of fallen into this two sides of the same coin journey, and whether you might give us a hint on whether they'll see each other again.
Well, certainly I like to play with this, two sides of the same coin phenomenon. Not only with the two Stark sisters, who of course are started from the same place, but as very different people. So as they go forward and have their different experiences, and we see how they react to them, their things that happen to them arise partly out of their circumstances, partly out of their own characters and the decisions they make. I do this with other characters as well too. The differing fates of Robb Stark and Jon Snow, the brothers, one the bastard brother, the other true-born brother. In the last two books, the differing ruling experiences of Cersei Lannister and Daenerys Targaryen, both of whom are thrust into a position of great power, and how do they handle that power, and what do they do with that power. That kind of thing is fun to examine. As to how much is planned ahead of time, well, I don't know, some of it, but maybe not as much as you might think. I know in broad strokes where the story is going. I know my ultimate destination and the ultimate fate of most of these characters, but a lot of it is the journey along the way, is a lot of the fun for me as a writer as well as for the reader. The devil is in the details, as they say, so I put my characters in motion, and then we see who they meet and where their story takes them.
All right. Speaking of Cersei, we know that Tyrion is capable of being a very good leader, and Jaime's shown a lot more signs of it since its journey with Brienne. Do you think that Cersei could have had that kind of leadership capability if she wasn't so paranoid in regards to protecting her family and obsessed with the prophecy that is completely clouding her judgment and, to a certain extent, her sanity?
Well, the prophecy is certainly one factor. Her own individual character, I think, is one factor. In one sense, Cersei is an interesting case, and it's a sort of a commentary on the society that she lives in. In one sense, she's extremely privileged. She's the daughter of one of the greatest houses in the realm. She's beautiful. She's rich. She's entitled. She is shown deference by most people that she meets. So you have a situation of extreme privilege that produces, I think, a certain attitude in people. On the other side, though, she's also a woman in an extremely patriarchal society where, on one hand she's being told that she's better than everybody and she has all these things, and the other be told, no, you can't do that. No, that's not for you. No, your brother gets that. You don't get that. So, that the conflict that creates in people, I think, is something that's fun to explore, and I've certainly tried to explore it with Cersei. But the other thing to keep in mind, though, is Cersei's journey is not over yet. So I'm only 5 books into it, and there's 2 more books to write. So keep reading.
All right. Do you think her relationship with Tyrion would be better if their mother had survived? Or do you think there's just sort of too many elements of personality clash there for that to have made as much of a difference as she credits it with?
I don't know. I'm writing the story as it happened. What-if stories I'll leave to the readers to figure out.
All right. In Faith of the Seven, aside from the father and the mother and the stranger, the male gods are very much what they do, the smith and the warrior, whereas the female ones are what they are. Does that, the crone and the maiden, does that tie into with the way the society is set up in what you just talked about with Cersei and the role of women versus the role of men? Does it dictate the way the faith observes morality in terms of gender and sexual dynamics?
I hadn't really thought about that in that way. Of course, I stole the maiden, mother, crone a triad from many established pagan religions. It's hardly original with me. I created the male parallel to go along with that, and then added the stranger to have the seven-sided god as sort of a variant on the Christian trinity of three gods in one. Instead, we have seven gods in one, but there's really just one god, etc. So.
No, well, there's other, parallels in that regard. Hephaestus and Ares, for example. You have two on-page lesbian sex scenes, but they're both with canonically straight female characters, whereas most of your gay characters are implied. Might that change? Is there a reason you chose to do that?
I use a very tight third-person viewpoint, so. Which is another way that things differ between the television show and the books, because my books are told through the viewpoints of a handful of characters in a cast of hundreds, thousands perhaps. There's like a dozen who we're actually inside their head, we're seeing through their eyes. So the only things we see firsthand are the things that they're present for. While when the television show can present something like the scene in Blackwater between Bronn and the Hound, which may have occurred in the books, but neither Bronn nor the Hound is a character, is a viewpoint character, so we would not have seen that, except we could have heard about it through dialogue. Bronn could have come back and said, "Well, this happened," but so that creates a stricture on what you can show and what you can't show. There are certainly plenty of rumors that are going on about sex between various characters. Are they true? Are they not true? Until they actually happen to one of my characters on stage, to one of the viewpoint characters, it's going to remain the present structure. And as to whether it will change in future books, yeah, anything's possible in future books. I have 3,000 more pages to write here, so.
Are there any point of view, or is there any character you wish you could give a point of view to, but who knows too much, or who simply isn't in the right place to have a relevant impact?
Well, I don't wish to give them a point of view, but yes, there are characters who know too much, and that's why they don't have a point of view. Some of the master players like Varys and Littlefinger are simply too much in the thick of things here.
Thank you so much for talking to me.
My pleasure.